Live from the Black Rock Man Cave. Ooh, I've always wanted to be in that.
We've never been there.
No, never invited. It's a Yes, Mom. We're going to play the Good Game in 2023 episode of Business Pants.
Yay.
Joined as always by the Lord of BS. I'm the guy who Larry Fink keeps mistakenly referring to as one of his least favorite Uber drivers. What's the deal with that?
Why are you driving an Uber?
Well, why? I thought I was pretty nice to Larry.
Can
In today's
bury the lead, please.
ESG stained bag of excellence scented nuggets called January 19th, 2023, The Good Game, featuring our first fancy expert of the year, Strive Asset Managers co-founder and executive chair Vivek Ramaswamy. Matt, you want to do any more introductions than that? Like, Vivek,
Look,
you want to introduce yourself?
I don't know that Vivek needs a lot of introduction to our audience.
We talk about Vivek a lot.
We talk about you all the time because we simultaneously like and hate half the things you're doing, which is the best.
But that's what we think about everybody, though. So you're in good company. Yeah,
that's also what I say to my wife. So it's win-win everywhere.
50% is a pretty good ratio. I'll take that.
I know we're winning, but yeah, Vivek is a startup founder. He wrote Woke Inc. He founded Strive Asset Management. Vivek's what would you call yourself? The tip of the spear of the anti-woke movement?
The tip of the spear. Wow, I like this.
No, I don't like to think of myself as being
violent.
Anything. I think of myself as being as the tip of the spear of the pro-excellence movement.
Ooh,
wow.
Excellence. I like that reframing.
Before we get going, Vivek, who exactly is anti-excellence? Is there a person who's against excellence?
Little bit.
Really?
I think there are a lot of people who are against excellence. They're against unapologetic pursuit of excellence because they're in favor of other affirmative values like equity. Equity is probably
and equity is we're already getting into it. Equity is anti-excellent. I find equity to be excellent. Okay. Yeah, good. We have a lot to discuss then.
Let's do this thing.
Yeah. We're going to play the good game, Vivek. I'll explain it to you. I'll explain it to our audience. Here's how the good game started, very simply.
Cool.
My actual mother, who was an avid listener. I don't know. Sometimes our charting goes up, goes down. One time she said to me, "Why do you guys complain so much? Why don't you have some good stuff, good stories?" So we developed the good game, and this is how it works. I pick headlines that feel good to me. Okay. And then I ask experts like yourself, like Matt, to tell me, to actually weigh in. Expert. Is it actually good? Is this really good, or am I just an idiotic snowflake?
Mostly that.
And I'm wearing a winter hat, so maybe
I like that those are the only two options. So
well, you don't know me that well.
If we could do this in all binaries, that's useful.
Yeah, it's funny that most labels describing me start with the adjective idiotic. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, your screen plate used to be just Damion Rollis, idiot, but
all right, enough flattery.
It's savant too.
Yeah, that's true. I'm all right. Does that make sense to you, Vivek? Are you ready to handle this? I know you have a time constraint, so let's just get into it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Here we go. Just to annoy Matt, little game show music there for you, Matt.
God, I hate the
Here we go. The first headline: Microsoft is giving. This is a softball. Microsoft is giving its U.S. employees unlimited time off. See, these are all ESG adjacent headlines, Vivek. E, S, or G. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
So I'll go first, just to set the tone. So research by some random company that I've never heard of, namely, found that employees, when given unlimited time off by their companies, actually only took 0.73 days off on average, more than they already had. They took less than one extra day. This feels like the ultimate corporate head fake. Like, it feels like we're going to give you, it's like internal greenwashing. We're going to give
it's good.
We're going to give you unlimited time off. You should love us. And then we're going to give you twice as much work. All right, you're never going to take it.
Give me a score.
I'm giving this a 2 out of 10. I don't like it.
Vivek?
I'm giving it a 5 straight down the fairway. And here's why.
Yeah.
I actually don't mind the policy. And I've run a biotech company before. It's a, multi-billion-dollar company today. I've stepped aside as CEO, but I had experiences as an entrepreneur before. My experience was different. I actually found that employees took less vacation when you got rid of vacation limitations in the first place.
I think that's
so.
Right.
In a certain sense, vacations were a forcing function to force. Now that's kind of the culture we had. It was a younger company, a startup. It's not Microsoft, but What I will say is I don't have a problem with the policy, but why I'm at a 5 is I have a problem with announcing it and making a big fuss out of it, right? Because that's about sending a signal about something else than what the policy can actually be, which is about autonomy and about the fact that we make decisions based on merit. And as long as it's pro-meritocracy, I'm in favor of it to say that we don't care what amount of vacation days you take. You get ahead of the company based on the content of your
So what signal do you think they're trying to send?
I think they're trying to send a signal that is apologist to a generation of Americans that believe that hard work is somehow an assault on their identity. And I think there's a big epidemic of laziness in the country. And I think that they're trying to send a smoke signal saying that, don't worry, we're on your side. When in fact, it doesn't have to be that. It can actually be a policy that enhances personal autonomy and agency.
Now, did you develop this theory on laziness just when you joined this show, just like 5 minutes ago, or is this something you've been thinking about?
It's a good question. I developed. It's a subject. It's a core pillar in my second book, actually, which came out. So Woke Inc. was the first one you mentioned. I had a second book that came out this last September, and my basic premise, one of my basic premises in that book, is success. Our national success breeds entitlement. Entitlement then breeds laziness, and that's what leads to victimhood, because victimhood basically fits laziness like a glove. As I say.
Sounds like you're talking about rich kids in suburbs. That's what I'm thinking about.
It does feel that way. Tech is that.
Place where you see it. It's one of the places where you see it. It's not the only place you see it.
All right. Moving on. Matt, you got something to say? You look anxious over there. Can I move on?
I'm not anxious.
We got limited time. Time.
I simultaneously agree and feel like epidemic is strong.
Vivek is maybe a future politician, because if he's answering 5, I think he's
that's
playing
good.
Both
that's
sides.
A good hedge.
Playing both sides.
You're not going to get that from me. Actually, I don't get a lot of playing both. I'm at a 1 and a 10 on that. I actually love the policy. I hate the PR.
Average.
Okay.
I like that.
Moving on. Next headline: 97% of top executives expect climate change to impact company strategy and operations. This is from Deloitte. 97%.
I mean, this is one of those surveys. They surveyed 2,000 C-suite executives in 24 countries, but almost half of them were basically European. So there's already a sort of a slant in it. But most of the companies, more than half of them, were $2 billion plus revenue. So they're big companies for the most part. I had to cheat and read the survey because the bottom 5 things, so they listed in there the positive impacts of sustainability. What were the top 5 positive impacts of their sustainability efforts? And in the bottom 5 responses, they included investor returns, new revenue, asset values, cost of capital, and old revenue, effectively recurring revenue. Effectively, they said by doing sustainability, they're saying climate change is going to have an impact on our strategy. And by doing it, it will cost us money, which to me is the incentive gap. You just described it's going to have an impact, and you're not going to do anything about it most likely, or you're just going to do the bare minimum because of the potential cost to capital and revenue in the short term.
Matt, was there a number in there somewhere?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's good that they expect it, but fucking do something. I'm going to go with the 3.
Okay. Ooh, Vivek?
1.5. I'm pretty close to
just so you know, on this show, I run up to all whole numbers. I don't play decimals. So.
Well, if you're going to round up, then I would just give you a 1.4 so you can make it a 1.
Okay, See, I don't know how to round up from 1.4. I'm stymied. All right, go ahead. Why a 1, Vivek?
Yeah, so look, I think that there's a little bit of a Heisenberg uncertainty dilemma going on here. Okay, what do I mean by that?
Yeah.
By observing,
I actually know, Matt. I actually know this
phenomenon, right? That they're changing the underlying phenomenon. They're leading the witness. And so I would venture to guess that if you actually deductively conducted that survey and asked people what are the top issues that you expect to impact your business or whatever is the way they want to phrase it as unbiased as they can, you get answers from executives that are specific to their business, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I don't think climate change shows up on most of those lists. I just don't think it does. I think that if you're a semiconductor company, China invading Taiwan might show up, which isn't a particularly popular trope in the ESG movement. That should show up on an Intel or an NVIDIA list. But anyway, there are other business-specific risks and opportunities and issues that would show up. But you lead the witness with a question about climate change. What else do you expect to get? And so I think that's a big part of what's going on here.
Here's what I don't understand. Whether you're for climate change or against, blah blah. Well, I don't care. There's political sides to all this. Isn't there money to be made from it from both sides? This is what I don't get. Even if you think it's nonsense.
Money to be made from what? From the PR around it, from the perception.
Sure, money's money. Who cares?
Money's made.
I don't care.
Made around the perception for sure. I
sure.
agree with that.
But money's made around the perception of many things in our society. Let's be real, right?
Look, if the executives, I also think that the bias in a survey like this is like to make it to the C-suite, you are generally, on average, in your 50s or 60s, right? You tend to be older, right? Unless you're like a young startup and you're in the C-suite or whatever. But we're talking about $2 billion plus revenue, and we're talking about European companies where everyone's basically like a dinosaur. Those aren't people who are going to live to see the impacts of climate change. Therefore, their lists might be different based on just their life, the experiences of their life and what they're worried about because they're worried about tomorrow. But if you asked Intel, because you used Intel as an example, Intel's interesting to me because, they just turned off water to a municipality outside of Phoenix in Arizona. And Intel has one of their major plants, their semiconductor plants in Arizona where there's no water. I actually think some of these things are more top of mind. It depends on, to your point, the bias of the question, who you're asking, and where they are. I do think that I don't think that it's top of mind for 97% of executives. Like it's not like the thing that they go home and they're like, honey, I'm really worried about the climate today. There's no fucking way.
In Phoenix, they might be.
I've lived in corporate America. I'm an asset manager, invest in these companies, talk to some of them. But here's what I'll say. There's two separate questions, and I got to be careful not to conflate my views on the two. The question of number one is, should it be on their top 5 list?
Right.
And then the second
That's
question
different.
is it on their top 5?
Is it?
That's what we're talking about. So I'm going to try to leave my own views on the first question out in fairness to this. I still think this is leading the witness, and it is just sociologically my view that if you ask that blank slate question for somebody who shows up at work on a given day, even if they're a European, it would say educated aristocrat in the ways of modern lexicons of how you're supposed to talk about social issues, even still, if you ask them on a given day, what are the top 5 issues on your mind for your business or however you want to frame the question, climate change is just not going to show up on that top 5 list until you lead the witness that they know exactly what they're supposed to say. Well, of course it is climate change.
That voice is what I think they're like at home with their monocle on, being like
the voice in my head.
that.
Moving on, and feel free not to filibuster.
Oh, shut up, Damion.
Playing the good game with Vivek Ramaswamy and Matt Moscardi, ESG expert. He even has the did MSCI give you that T-shirt?
No, I didn't.
When you retired,
MSCI didn't give me this. No.
All right. Here's the headline: Women CEOs, otherwise known as female CEOs. You could do either interchangeable, women, female, whatever you want. Run more than 10% of Fortune 500 companies for the first time in history. 10%.
Woo! Are we?
Come on, is that good or bad, or neither? Or come on, someone help me out.
I mean,
I don't care is the answer.
Okay, that's not a score.
It just doesn't matter.
That's a It feels five-ish.
Well, okay, let me put it this way. From a different perspective. As we know, women are much more educated than men, as it turns out.
Just
on average.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So maybe this is a good thing.
So can I just ask a question? Why isn't the headline about what percentage of educated people run companies, and why do we have to use a low resolution heuristic if that's actually what we care about, right? That's not what this is about. This is not about a heuristic of are more competent people running companies, because there would have been plenty ways to adjudicate that question other than retrofitting it and shoehorning it into two binary genders, and then there's a question of whether or not there are other versions of genders that you're shoehorning it into. But why shoehorn the question of competence into gender if that's really the thing you care about? If you care about competence, talk about competence. If you care about diversity of experience, screen people or talk about the diversity of experience. I think it's about social objective.
But the reason why the headline headline exists like
wait before you talk, Vivek, is there a score there?
I mean, like, I would take a. I don't care about this question, so if that puts me at a 1,
okay, that's fair. You know what? You're joining a good group here, because Matt often doesn't care.
I don't care about half of the things that Damion picks out.
Matt, what do you think here, Matt?
My problem with it is the reason why the heuristic exists, that the focus is on gender and not competence, is because if you flip this headline and you say just under 90% of CEOs are white men, effectively white men. And it's not going to be 90%. It's going to be like 86%, right?
Yeah, sure.
There is no way mathematically or statistically that 86% of white men are more qualified to be CEOs than any other cohort. Like, I just can't. And maybe
it can't be possible, can it?
Maybe it's that I can't believe that.
I'll give you one possibility. I'll give you a possibility.
Yeah, go ahead.
You could react to it. Maybe it's right, maybe it's not, right? And I'm not advancing this theory, but I'm offering it as something possibility. Okay, that for 50 years in this country, as you said, many of these people are going to be in their 60s. So like, let's trace back to when they were like 10 years old or even younger. Were there differences in the 1960s and 1970s with respect to how people got an educational head start based on the color of their skin or based on their gender?
Yeah, no doubt.
I think they probably were.
Sure.
Were those differences big? I think they probably were.
Right.
And so if you roll that forward into the present, and competence and effectiveness and whatever were your sole arbiter, and that those early starts do make a difference over the course of one's educational arc and then one's entry into the marketplace, that it wouldn't shock me that if the groups that were ahead 50, 60 years ago, even getting that early head start, did indeed be the people who and members of groups that were overrepresented in those that were most.
So then you would agree that in 10 to 20 years we should see this figure even out then?
I think so.
Yeah,
if competence were the only metric and merit were the only metric, I think we're going to naturally see an equilibration without a quota-driven top-down system.
And not to weigh down my wonderful game, because I know we have limited time, and I'm already pre-inviting you back to join us again. Join us regularly if you want. But but let me just ask you this: maybe there's definitely not enough time for you to answer this, so you can just shoot me a dirty look or whatever you want. But how does one even define competence, excellence, merit? Like who gets to define that? Do I get to define that? I would love to get a crack at it.
We made board
sabermetrics. I think each institution should define it for itself, and it should fall out of purpose, out of what is its core purpose. Okay. If you're Disney, they say their goal is to be the world's premier entertainment company. If you're a university, presumably your mission is to educate students and your students, whatever age they are. Whatever your purpose is, excellence means, merit means hiring the kinds of people that best help you advance that purpose, seeking out the diversity of individuals and attributes and views that allow you to best advance that purpose. And it would be curious to me if the same forms of off-the-shelf formulas that showed up in 3-letter acronyms from ESG to DEI happened to be the exact same formula for institutions that had diverse purposes in their own right. And so that's why I have a little bit of antecedent skepticism, as you probably guess, to the 3-letter formula off-the-shelf model of borrowing corporate purpose, as opposed to each institution and corporation defining it for themselves. They've got to define what excellence means to them. That's what I would say.
Matt, is he right? Help me out.
Is he right?
He gave a 1. I'm looking for your number, Matt.
I'm giving it a 5 because it's really hard to celebrate.
That's not a real answer, but that's
fine. 10%. Like it's
it doesn't sound good.
But I honestly, the acronyms. The funny thing about the acronyms is they're pointless. Like I'll tell you from the inside, and this is a conversation we should have again from the inside, having built these things. Like it's data sets. It's randomly organized data sets, and it's just data sets. But
it's a marketing gimmick. We lived through the combination of E, S, and G. I started as G. Matt started as S. It's a marketing gimmick. It's a
marketing gimmick, but that has, in my opinion, a discursive impact on the way people actually think. So the people who originate it and know how to use it and interpret it, like you all, may see through the fact that it's a marketing gimmick.
Right.
That has it's like back to that Heisenberg effect, the Heisenberg principle. You have an underlying impact on the supposed thing that you're describing or measuring, including a new generation that is so hungry for a cause and purpose and meaning that join these companies that actually take these as cues for how they're supposed to think, largely because they were cultivated in a generation where they weren't taught to think independently anyway. So this goes to deep-seated cultural issues, but what begins as a marketing gimmick can actually have cultural externalities for a movement.
And just so you know, Vivek, we're the only ones who come from this industry who are willing to call it a marketing gimmick. We're the only ones. So yeah,
I appreciate it. I mean, but I also like taking the best versions of why these movements exist. Which, if I may just finish that point here.
Sure.
I think that I talked about those inequalities or whatever 60 years ago that could account for a meritocratic decision-making system that still resulted in those kinds of disparities, but should naturally close. I think a core part of the authentic, not the marketing. I don't think it's all a marketing gimmick. Personally, I think that there are certain authentic believers in advancing social agendas that say, you know what, those are inequalities that we need to address by rectifying and penalizing the groups of people who perpetrated them. And we need quota systems that elevate the victim groups that were harmed. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think it's a coherent and interesting point of view.
Right.
That's what I think is actually going on in the authentic version of this. But what I sort of chafe at in this industry is that largely because the law demands it in certain cases, you retrofit that into some justification about this being about value creation or merit or creating value.
Well, that's the marketing angle.
Well,
yeah, but that's not really what's at issue. It's not the motivation. It's an ex post justification that stops us from having the real debate about how you rectify historical injustices, which is a much more interesting debate, just not one we're allowed to have because this sustainability movement decided it's about value creation in the last 18 months.
Matt, let me translate that for you. What I'll put it in terms that you'll understand. So, like, if you're playing basketball and you get fouled, right? You can then go to the free throw line to make up those points.
The funny part about ESG to me, or DEI even, is the reason why we talk about it at all is because a bunch of morons, and I was one of those morons, and so is Damion, like 20 years ago, collected as much of the data as we could, not because we had, and I can tell you this from the people I knew and the way that we did it, right? So this is like, it's relatively apocryphal in as much as it's my experience. We collected everything without necessarily knowing what had value.
Disclosure nerds.
We were disclosure nerds. We were literally
I still am.
The more I know, the better
disclosure.
I can make a decision.
It.
And then when you hand that data to anybody else, I used to say to this to clients all the time. Like the ESG movement was all about disclosure, and as soon as you hand Gordon Gekko a bunch of information, he's gonna do something with it, and it may not be what the nuns of St. Francis do with it. They're just gonna do it differently.
I'm familiar with that argument, and I think it's a great. And I think you mean it when you say it. I think it's a great packaging to appeal to people who have capitalist instincts and are traders. I'm just, having fun and being provocative.
Please.
You don't have to apologize for being you.
Apologize.
We're not asking for that.
Okay.
No.
I think that's basically like a macho sort of veneer that you're wrapping around something that you don't have to apologize for either. Okay.
Sure. Okay.
I think that the disclosure wrapper around this, I think, is mostly fake because the question of what you select as an attribute for disclosure involves a normative choice.
True.
Of course.
So the questions are descriptive, but the selection of questions is not descriptive, it's normative.
We knew
and so
that.
I just don't buy the Gordon Gekko. It's supposed to design to like appeal to people who are like presumably my old hedge fund friends and like, yeah, we're cool. We just want to make money. And we just care about this stuff, environmental and social stuff, not because we have a heart, but because we want to like make money. And it's about like disclosure. I think it's mostly BS. And I'm very familiar with that argument. It just doesn't resonate with me. Like, here's a question for you, curiosity. And you'll just, I'm really curious. Maybe the answer is yes. Did you collect data on political viewpoints and whether or not they were registered members of one major political party?
No, but we would have if we could have.
If we could have gotten it.
We want that information. Gordon Gekko.
If we could have gotten, honestly,
we would have.
I'll tell you, one of the first things that blew my mind.
Political contributions. It's public information.
It's public information that's not trackable to corporations easily. In fact,
the mapping. I'm going to correct you. That is trackable to corporations very easily because one of the things you're required to do when you make a political donation is actually
if you've made a political donation, and we need this donation, and the data only works if you have it to scale for the entire board for every not just the U.S. but the entire globe.
Here's the thing. Here's what I think is actually going on, and I just want to challenge you guys with this, and you challenge me back, and it's fun. So I think that the reason you didn't collect that data, and I'm not super personalizing this, but a lot of people don't collect that data, is they don't want the answer when it comes to diversity on other attributes. And the answer, look at NASDAQ, right? So NASDAQ had this rule change, right? You had to explain yourself. You know what I'm talking about, right? If you didn't collect the information on, race, sexual orientation, gender, and explain yourself if you don't have diversity on certain attributes. Well, it turns out when you propagate a rule change in this country, the SEC, which governs NASDAQ, it's the regulator of the exchanges, has to go through a notice and comment period. so public gets to provide comments. Somebody says, hey, how about we add just, I'm not against that. How about we just add veteran and disability status to the list? They didn't even say political expression, which I think is an interesting, better arbiter of a better proxy for viewpoint diversity. Supposedly this was about preventing groupthink in the boardroom. Why not just screen candidates for boards on the diversity of their experiences or the diversity of their ideas instead of using these half-hearted heuristics? But anyway, let's put political expression to one side, which I actually think is a better proxy for a viewpoint difference. No, these people just said, can we add veteran status and disability status because it might be a better heuristic for at least diversity of experience. Here's what they came back and said. After consideration, we've decided that there's a counterintuitive conclusion that adding more arbiters or more distinctions of diversity would have the impact of reducing the desired forms of diversity. So with all due respect, don't give me the Gordon Gekko speech that this is about disclosure and more information.
He's talking to you, Matt.
Yeah, but
Matt.
What NASDAQ does and what we collected is two very different things. Like so NASDAQ, I disagree with NASDAQ. I want that information too. And in fact, in 2007,
you say that now because you have to, but
no,
but
I really don't. We built something called Board Sabermetrics, in which we are collecting political donations to the extent that we can and mapping them to individuals on boards to understand what is the political diversity. The whole thing we built when we left the machine. When we built in 2007 ESG ratings, there wasn't that much information.
I'll give you another one. I mean, this is maybe just helpful. This is less about the argument. What part of the country they grew up in, whether or not they're self-reported, whether they grew up in, not that they live in, that they grew up in, their household income, whether or not it was in the 25th, 50th, 70th median percentile or median percentile of 25th, 50th, or 75th. I think those are interesting arbiters of data.
We agree.
Self-reporting. Well, guess what? You have to self-report your sexual orientation anyway. So I think
you have an argument with.
Intellectually, honestly, I have no problem with it. I just think there is no intellectual honesty in this, and it is disclosure as a veneer for advancing an agenda. And the idea that it's just about more information is a bit of a smokescreen and a deflection for the fact that the selection of the attributes is really just about quietly using an invisible hand of a different kind to actually guide decisions in a certain direction.
I think there's two things that are true. I think you downplay how difficult it was in 2007 to get the data at scale in a way that was useful, right? We're talking about 15, 16 years ago. The data that we have today didn't even exist. We scraped as much as we possibly could because we literally did not care. We wanted to know. I
hear you. Fair enough. Yeah. And let's have a critique of you. I don't know about
I'm telling you the inside guts of a lot of the industry. I think there are a lot of people. It would be disingenuous for me to say that weren't people with agendas. But when it came to like inside a beast like MSCI, who's run by a libertarian who could give two fucks about like really saving the planet, I think, when we were building, we were building something with an ethos of what is out there, what don't we know, what can we collect, and I think on the government side in particular, like are they left or right-handed? Because there's actually studies that show like people with left and right hands actually have different perceptions of the world. It's stupid stuff. We look for everything.
It's not stupid stuff. It might be interesting stuff, but my point is, can you tell me if this is true or false? Just like honest introspection here, and not of yourself, but of the
industry.
Peers. Your collective peers,
who we don't speak for, but go ahead.
Seems to me, well, you can channel it because I'm more of a foreigner in your.
But don't forget, we left MSCI to create this company,
something that was different
because we wanted to have a voice. We want
a minority party in a country where I'm an immigrant. So just talk to me as an immigrant, and just let's with that trope. You can still help me, right? You're better at knowing what the majority party
got it
thinks. Okay. So I'm going to offer a hypothesis, and then you tell me that it's right or wrong. I don't think that we'd be talking about left-handed and right-handed and all of the other stuff that now gets added to that list of the implicit bias and whatever else we're supposed to track for here in tracking proxies for desired forms of viewpoint diversity. If it weren't for mostly an ex post justification to deflect criticisms from people like me that claim that the agenda was something other than just dispassionately collecting information about all forms of diversity. My hypothesis is that this is about race, gender, and sexual orientation, there are deep pitfalls and even self-acknowledged pitfalls that the proponents of collection of such data acknowledge and realize that even if it's not deflection for the purpose of external purposes, even internally to feel intellectually honest after the fact, they add a bunch of other attributes. But let's say we were all the same race and sexual orientation and gender were not an issue, that we would not be tracking these other attributes, but for a little bit of a tail that came on and joined for the fun of actually making us feel like this was intellectually honest. Tell me that's not 100%.
Matt, hold on. I'll let Matt answer this, but can I just give you the sobering reality of where this actually started? I know that people are really fixated on things like gender and sexual orientation.
On it right
great,
now, yeah.
That's great. But the sobering reality of where the at least the G in ESG started was the collapse of Enron, right? And how can we identify?
We're not talking
hold
about
on, hold on. No, we are. We're talking about all of it. This is because this is a part of it. It's the G is what you're describing. If you're just describing gender stats, and it's part of it. It's who is running the company, right? So the sobering reality is that people wanted a way to maybe potentially identify risks going forward. That's it.
I agree with that.
But you're the one fixating on these things, and I'm glad that you're fixating on it. Well, you are.
Well, I think we need.
But I talk about women who run companies. You're fixated on competence. I don't even know where you get that, frankly. I don't understand that line of thought.
I think there's a history lesson piece of this, which is
I already gave it, Matt.
Disclosure movement. First of all, it started 3,000 years ago with religious investors, right? Like it was about what business lines or whatever. The birth of like modern ESG was GRI, which is the disclosure tool built off of environmental issues and the Exxon Valdez spill. It had nothing. In fact, none of the early GRIs asked anything about like gender. There was no gender politic involved in it at all.
That was the G, right?
It was the people piece of this actually wasn't interesting until Enron, when people started asking, who's running these companies? Who's doing the audits? Why are they doing it this way? And then you start gathering the data on those kinds of things. What happens afterwards, and I'm telling you this from the viewpoint of people who built the thing, right? What happens afterwards, that is the unintended consequence. Because when you put the data out in the world, there are millions of people are going to see it and attach their own agendas to it, as they will anything though. M&Ms, whatever they do, they'll put it under their lens. We can't help that. When we read these headlines, some of our reactions are actually very similar to yours. Like, why are we focused on this way instead of like 10 years ago we were focused on the other way? And we have like some of the same reactions. Using it is a different sort of.
So history is like a scatter plot, and you draw some straight lines through it, and you drew an interesting one. I'll draw you another one. And again, the lines you draw through a scatter plot are often a normative choice, right? And the scatter plot
I would say they always are, but go ahead.
They almost always are, unless it's tethered to some sort of formula derived from a law of physics in the universe of how you.
Right, but we're talking about finance and public corporate. Right.
So we're on the same page there. So self-admittedly, I'll draw you a different one that's it's not objective. It's a narrative, but it's a narrative that is nonetheless supported by the facts every bit as much as your narrative just was. I think what happened was after the 2008 financial crisis, there was a need for financial institutions, capitalism broadly, to apologize for the Gordon Gekko model of capitalism. And they wanted to do it without actually submitting and bending the knee to the Occupy Wall Street demands, which called for decimating the whole system. And they saw a fissure in two wings of a progressive movement, that both of which were after accountability. And by the way, I was also an opponent of the bailouts, like many movements in the progressive movement were at that time. I got my first job at a hedge fund in the fall of 2007. That earned an honorable mention in Michael Lewis's book, The Big Short. I mean, I lived this stuff. I watched it. Okay. What happened was that Occupy Wall Street wanted to take money from those wealthy banks and redistribute it to poor people to help poor people, because after all, the money in their balance sheets was largely the money provided by the public, paid for by taxpayers. I think it was an interesting claim, and one that I at least had some sympathy for, even if that wasn't the policy solution I would have favored. But right around that time, there was the birth of a new neo-progressive movement that said, well, there's other problems that we need to deal with. Racism, misogyny, bigotry, climate change on the list.
Right.
And if you're a financial institution, that's a much more appealing solution to embrace those causes rather than to submit to the most naked demands of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And that's exactly what happened.
To embrace those causes by name only, or an actual actual
because
policy?
they didn't embrace
by name
anything.
and by as much minimal action as you could take to plausibly support the.
So by you mean by embrace it in a greenwashy way? Is that what you mean?
And I don't think total greenwashing works. So
Right.
embrace it to whatever minimal level of action you need to take to support the alleged green label or the 3-letter acronymized label to get them off, to get the left off your back.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they did. The old left wanted to take Wall Street. They did it, and I think that's effectively what happened, is that they lent as little of their corporate power as they could, but lent corporate power nonetheless to defang Occupy Wall Street and elevate this new racial, gender, identity, climate change obsessed progressive movement.
Well,
It was arranged marriage between two sides that didn't love each other.
Right.
It's kind of like mutual prostitution, but they were bedfellows. They each got something out of the trade, and that's the story of the last 14 years.
I don't think that well, first of all, I think that the timeline is way shorter than you think, as in they didn't do that until much more recently. But I'll say this.
Of course, but the old stuff was something different. I'm saying that the character of it changed. Even though ESG came out in 2004 and social responsible investing was before that, that's fine. I'm aware of some of this history. I'm
talking about their embrace of it. Their embrace of the products. The product launches didn't happen really in earnest. The greenwashy, let's all remodel ourselves as sustainable. We actually launched this company in part to make fun of how fucking ridiculous some of these, because you get these, it's oh, now we're saving the world. Oh yeah, yesterday you weren't, though. That stuff actually didn't happen until
Chief Kneeler Jamie Dimon. Yes.
Yeah, we call them Chief Kneeler. That was 2017, 2018.
Well, this is
way
later.
later.
It's a crescendo. I mean, I'll take you back to 2012. Okay, so this traces directly to the 2008 origin story. Perhaps what I'm about to tell you may not know, and most audience members won't know, but it's interesting. I think, at least interesting to people like me who are into this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the big banks had reached mega publicly announced settlements with the Obama Justice Department, the DOJ,
Mm-hmm.
$5 billion for Goldman. It was $13 billion for some of the other banks. Big dollar settlements for the alleged sins heading up to the 2008 financial crisis. Now, it turns out the Obama administration wanted to fund a lot of causes that a Tea Party Congress said they're not going to be willing to fund, including donations to nonprofits like the National Urban League and La Raza and a bunch of others. Anyway, they made a closed room deal with those big banks where they said, actually, you know what, here's the press release we put out for how much your fines are, but we can give you a 2-for-1 discount, or even in some cases, a 3-for-1 discount. For every dollar you give to one of these nonprofits, you owe three fewer dollars to the public fisc. Banks, being fond of money, took that trade, and actually makes for a much better press release to say that you're donating to a nonprofit rather than paying a criminal penalty. Oh, and by the way, many of those are 501c3s that get you tax deductible, charitable deduction on your net income. So everyone got something out of that trade, but it was the beginning of, again, this trend of advancing substantive social agendas at some cost, but at a cost that was still smaller than what the alternative would have been. And a trend like this, 4 or 5 years, isn't really that long of a time. It's just a crescendo.
I would actually,
2018, when Trump pulls out of Paris Climate, then there's a new reawakening that says, if business leaders, if government leaders aren't going to solve the problems, business leaders have to step up into the void. Then they start believing their own lie and start feeling sanctimonious about it, and that gets us to where we are.
Vivek, I would argue with you that I call this the pitchfork on fire theory. I would argue that this has been going on forever, and that is that the leaders of our world and our nation, they realize that they feel when people are starting to come for them, right? And they need to kind of dole out pittances or statements or whatever to keep the masses, to quell the masses, to quiet them down. But this has been going on forever. This is not a new thing.
Well, I don't.
Social media is a new thing, and it pushes out the narrative in a way that makes you think there's a cacophony of this, but this is not new.
This hasn't been happening for all of human history. Yeah. This is just the version that's happening now.
Well, I don't think it's that coordinated. So one thing, it's very. It's
not coordinated like a conspiracy. There's people who think people get in front of
it's not like a Soros-y thing, right? Like
it's not a conspiracy smoke-filled room. It's what I call emergent conspiracy. It's just happened.
There could be a conspiracy. Let's not forget, Matt, that when we first started this in 2019, was it that the first target we made fun of was the Business Roundtable for pretending
Yeah,
for,
good
purport,
choice.
for pretending
Didn't
to
think that was
support
bullshit. Who
for
didn't?
pretending to support stakeholder capitalism. We knew it was bullshit, and that was really our first target. So, in a sense, there was a kind of a collective effort to pretend to be into stakeholder capitalism.
But I think actually you have to draw a line between what is said by the corporations and honestly their ability to push
That's our
out the
job.
narrative on social media is actually the biggest differentiator. Like, because the crescendo doesn't exist without a way to get that messaging out, and social media is the way, and it's controlled by 3 people, right? Like the entirety of social media.
We could have like hours on social media. I have so much that I'm tempted to. I got to roll.
You
but
gotta
thank you.
bounce.
Well, you are coming back. You're right. You are returning.
This is fun. Yeah, we should
This is the real
just do this for fun.
conversation.
Wait till
I
you
love-
see our bill, though. Wait till you see how much we charge you for this appearance.
Vivek, you can bounce. Damian and I will wrap
Thank you.
up.
The
Thank you
first,
for
our
joining
first
us. The
guest
first-
to destroy my good game. You completely destroyed my
You
game. So
destroyed my
I,
game, but
We'll play it
yeah, that's
properly.
okay.
the best
That's
way to
okay.
do it. We'll talk to you soon, Vivek. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivek.
I really appreciate it.
Is he going to leave it to upload? Is the real question.
Probably not.
Matt, do you want to reflect on our visit from our fancy expert, or would
I
you
think
like
we
to?
do.
Yeah.
I think we reflect.
Before you wrap on that, in our first ever abridged good game, I want to report. I still want to report the scores because we have a lot of geeks at home that like to know these things.
Do we?
Yeah, Matt, you came in at a 3, and
It's not
Vivek came in at a 2. So you're both pessimistic a-holes. Okay,
It
so
was not great. I think there's a lot. First of all, I don't understand the focus on DEI.
look,
really
this is
don't
the
get
thing
it.
that I don't. I find it fascinating that he went right from a headline about female CEOs into competence. It is a weird, and it's not just Vivek. It's
No,
this
it's not
entire the entire movement of this theater. It is I don't get the. It is a little alarming that like the over focus on DEI. I don't really understand it.
know why we would fight against. Like, it presupposes that anyone diverse is not competent. Like,
and it's a sad thing to admit
as
out
if the
loud that you think
companies
that. Yeah.
adding diversity are adding them because they're less competent and they feel like they have to add them for
What
greenwashing
company
reasons.
would ever do
Zero.
that? Yeah.
Zero
No one-
companies would do that I can
Yeah.
think of. Like, we've studied companies for 20 years, and I can't think of a single company that would just be like, you know what,
publicly
we're gonna do?
traded corporation.
We're
A
going
publicly
to add
traded
a
corporation.
CEO
Who we know is stupid.
who's an idiot.
Who we know is a product of a bias system against white men.
But because they're Hispanic, we're gonna make them the. There's no
And even
way.
though they went to Harvard because of our diversity, we know they're an idiot.
There's just no.
Yeah.
And you can't say like things like the pay gap. Like, oh, that's the competence gap, right? Like, they're not getting paid as much.
That's just
because they're
now you're
less
just depressing me. Now
competent?
you're just depressing me.
That
I'm
focus
actually
is
excited to keep
very
talking to him
confusing
about
to me.
this. That's the one area I do want to continue with him on is this focus on this so-called merit, this so-called competency and excellence. I do want to hear the methodology behind that.
I'm really confused by the focus on it though. Like, why do we care that much about it? Like,
because I think it's part of the theater of these culture wars. I think you're trying to foment anger. You're trying to create battles.
But I don't get the upside. Like,
the upside is that you guarantee the vote of an aggrieved white male. I don't get why Republicans do this anyway, because it's like a limited audience that they're pandering to. I don't get why they only want aggrieved white men. It's because it feels like a dying party if that's what you're going to do. But that,
But the second
that's
part,
just me.
The second part I don't get in any way, shape, or form is we spent a lot of time where he really wanted to discredit the data because he said there was bias in choosing.
But he also likes the data too, I think.
But I can't understand. Like,
he wanted the data.
If you're in finance, you want the data. If you've been in finance, all I've ever heard from anyone in finance was give me the data. That literally for MSCI for 15 years, all they said was your ratings are nice. Give us the data, right? Like,
I think we can talk about this with him next time. I think he's convinced that the offices of these companies that we worked at, places like MSCI, is like an Occupy Wall Street rally, where in actuality it is a bunch of dullards who really don't have an opinion one way or the other. I rarely got engaged. My colleagues at these places so rarely were engaged in politically active conversations that I don't know what people like Vivek imagine these places to be. And maybe he'll tell me that, okay, the average analyst is maybe not this person, but in the upper levels, they're having these heated discussions. I don't know. I never heard it. I never saw it.
For him to tell us what it was like for us to go get
I like it. I enjoyed it, though. Nice. I appreciated that he had an opinion that he stuck with. I don't appreciate that he blew up my good game. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, who cares? Nobody cares about the good game. But I do think those two.
That's absolutely not true. You can't tell someone who said that they care about it that nobody cares about it.
The focus on those two things is just really deeply perplexing to me.
But that's what do you mean? That's the focus of this movement.
I mean, I get it. You might be outraged that NASDAQ sets a quota for diversity on a board. All right. Fine. You could be outraged about that. Write your comment letter, sue NASDAQ, and move on with your life. But the whole thing.
But to his point, though, what I don't understand is that or you might be outraged that half the boards aren't women because they are more educated. That could be a source of outrage too.
I don't understand why you would the reason why you want to purposefully ignore the reason why the quota gets put in place in the first place. Because there is increasingly volumes of evidence that people are systematically eliminated from the pool of board applicants. We know that I didn't have the heart to tell him that you did one of the studies that
why wouldn't you? You should have. Why wouldn't you?
I forgot about it because I don't care.
Listen,
about you.
I enjoyed most of his opinions. The only opinion that I thought was literally coated in an off-smelling kind of excrement was this bizarre thought that because 60 years ago, which maybe is the average age of a board member, maybe 55, 60, because in that point in history in the American educational system, since women and people of color were having a bad go of it, that they're probably less educated.
Yeah,
I did not understand that one.
That one wasn't.
That was creepy. But that one was borderline creepy. The rest of it I enjoyed. I enjoyed.
At least that point,
that's creepy.
I understand that point.
No. There's no evidence to support that. There's no evidence to support that.
I'm not saying I agree with that point, but that coming at it from that lens, being to describe the reason why there's 80% or 90% white men in power is to go backwards and look at what the power structures were.
No, but we didn't talk about the effects of networking, though. We didn't talk about
those things, which is why we need to have them back on. Which is
because we didn't even talk about our core product. Yeah.
I mean, we talked about some of that stuff. That was the weirdest and yet most enlightening. Good
Not
game
enlightening.
I feel like we've ever played
per se.
I mean, no, look.
I enjoyed it.
Nobody on the ESG, S&P Global's ESG podcast, is not going to have Vivek on, right?
Can I say this before you incoherently wrap up? Can I say this? If you are on the ESG side of things, if you're on the anti-Vivek side of things, let's say, and you too have passionate, opinions, come join us. Come on, let's talk.
This is the greatest time ever. That's Damion Ramaswamy. I'm Matt Moscardi. Join us tomorrow as we wrap up the week. Big thanks to Vivek Ramaswamy for showing up and debating with us. It's what it was. It was a debate. Next time, maybe we'll have more fun or we'll just debate more. Until then, goodbye.